Okay, so you want to own a prison. Build the walls, lock the doors, and get paid by the government for every person inside. A guaranteed customer base, funded by the state that never runs out. It sounds like the most recession-proof business on earth, and that's exactly the problem, because the moment a prison becomes a business, the incentives quietly flip and what you're actually being paid for is not what you think. Most people picture a prison as a building, concrete, steel, razor wire, a place that holds people. That picture is exactly what will bankrupt you, because the building is the cheapest, simplest part of the entire operation. The building just sits there. What you are really buying is far stranger, far more fragile, and tied to forces you do not control and can barely predict. So before you sign anything, let us walk through what it actually takes to own one of these things, what it costs to keep it running, and the single hidden number that decides whether you get rich or quietly go broke. Start with getting in the door. Do not simply decide to open a prison the way you open a restaurant. In almost every country, locking human beings in cells is a power that belongs to the state. The state arrests, the state convicts, the state sentences. So if you want to run a prison as a private business, you are not entering a free market. You are asking the government to hand you a piece of one of its most sensitive powers and let you charge for it. That permission is the entire foundation of your business, and it is also the first thing that can be taken away. So the deal you are chasing is not really a building permit, it is a contract. A government somewhere decides it has more prisoners than it has room for, or that it would rather pay someone else to handle the problem, and it puts that problem out to bid. You win the bid, and in exchange for building and staffing a facility, the government agrees to pay you. That payment is the heart of everything. Get the structure of that payment right, and you have one of the steadiest income streams in the world. Get it wrong, and you have built the most expensive empty building in the state. Here is how that payment usually works, and this is where it starts to get interesting. You are typically paid what is called a per diem, a daily rate for every inmate you hold, not a lump sum, not a flat fee, a price per person per day. Hold 1,000 people for 1 day, collect 1,000 daily rates. Hold them for a year, collect those rates 365 times over. On the surface, this is beautiful. Your revenue is simple, predictable, and it renews every single morning whether the economy is booming or collapsing. People do not stop being sent to prison during a recession. If anything, the opposite. But look closely at that per diem and you will see the trap hiding inside it. You get paid per occupied bed, which means an empty bed earns you nothing, and an empty bed is not free. That empty bed still sits inside a building you borrowed money to construct. It still sits on a cell block that has to be heated, lit, and watched by guards who are paid whether the cell is full or not. So the day your prison is half full is the day your business is quietly bleeding, because your costs barely move while your revenue falls off a cliff. This is the first thing nobody tells you about the prison business. It looks like you are in the business of holding people. You are not. You are in the business of filling beds, and those two things are not the same. A hospital that holds patients still gets paid to help them leave. A prison, structured this way, only gets paid while the bed stays full. Empty is the enemy. And the moment you understand that, you start to see why this industry became so controversial, because the entire machine is built to reward one thing above all others, and that thing is occupancy. Before you can chase occupancy, though, you have to understand who your customers even are, because in this business there is more than one kind, and they are not equally valuable. Some of your beds might be filled by a state government, holding people convicted under state law. Some might come from the federal government, which runs its own separate system. And in some countries, a whole other stream exists entirely: detention. People held not because they were convicted of a crime, but because they are waiting on an immigration decision or some other administrative process. Each of these customers pays differently, commits for different lengths of time, and carries a completely different level of political risk. A contract that looks rock solid under one government can become a liability the moment public opinion turns against that particular kind of detention. So you are not really serving one market. You are juggling several, each with its own weather. There is also a second revenue stream that many owners quietly count on, and it has nothing to do with the daily rate at all. Inside your walls sits a captive market in the most literal sense of the word. The people you hold need to make phone calls to their families. They want to buy snacks, toiletries, and small comforts from a commissary. They may want to send money, use email terminals, or access other services. And they have nowhere else to shop. There is no competitor across the street. Whatever price you set or allow a contracted vendor to set is the only price available. For years, this turned basic services like a phone call into something extraordinarily expensive, generating a stream of profit squeezed not from the government but from some of the poorest families in the country trying to stay in touch with someone locked away. It is one of the most lucrative corners of the business, and also one of the ugliest, and regulators have increasingly moved to cap exactly these charges, which means even this hidden stream is not as safe as it once looked. Now let us talk about the cost of getting a single bed to exist in the first place, because it is far higher than the concrete suggests. Building a modern secure facility is not like building a warehouse. Every door is a security device, every window is a vulnerability that has to be engineered away. You need control rooms, surveillance systems, perimeter fencing, sally ports, medical wings, kitchens that can feed hundreds of people at once, and a physical structure strong enough to hold people who very much do not want to be held. The cost of building a single cell, fully equipped, can run into the tens of thousands of dollars. Multiply that across a facility built to hold 1,000 or 2,000 people, and you are looking at a construction bill in the hundreds of millions before you have earned a single dollar. And you almost never pay that in cash. You borrow it, you go to lenders, or you raise it in the bond market, and you promise to pay it back out of those daily rates you have not yet started collecting. So from the very first day your prison opens, you are carrying an enormous debt, and that debt does not care whether your beds are full. The interest is due on schedule, every month, forever, until the loan is gone. Your lenders were not promised a percentage of occupancy, they were promised a fixed payment. Which means before you earn a cent of profit, a huge slice of every daily rate is already spoken for, flowing straight back out the door to whoever financed the building. Now layer on the cost of actually running the place, because this is where owners who only did the construction math get destroyed. The single largest ongoing cost in a prison is not steel or electricity, it is people. Human beings watching other human beings, around the clock, every hour of every day, forever. A prison never closes. It never sleeps. It cannot be left unattended for even a minute. That means you are staffing 3 shifts a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, with correctional officers, supervisors, medical staff, kitchen staff, maintenance, and administration. Payroll is the beating heart of your expenses, and it is relentless. And here is the squeeze that defines the private prison business. The government has agreed to pay you a fixed daily rate. That rate does not automatically rise just because your costs do. So the only way to widen the gap between what you are paid and what you spend is to push your costs down. And the biggest cost, the one you have the most control over, is labor. So the pressure, always, quietly, is to spend less on staff. Fewer officers per inmate, lower wages, less training, less experience. Every dollar you shave off payroll is a dollar that falls straight to the bottom line. But labor fights back in a way concrete never does. Pay your officers too little, and they leave. In a lot of these facilities, turnover is brutal, sometimes cycling through a huge share of the staff in a single year. And every time an experienced officer walks out, you are left training a new one who does not yet know the building, the routines, or the people inside. A prison run by exhausted, underpaid, constantly rotating staff is not just less safe, it is less efficient. Over time, costs explode as you scramble to cover shifts. Mistakes multiply, and the money you thought you were saving by cutting wages quietly leaks back out through turnover, overtime, and the cost of things going wrong. So even the one cost you supposedly control fights you the moment you squeeze it too hard. You can probably already feel why this is dangerous. A prison understaffed to protect a profit margin is a more violent, less stable, more chaotic place. And instability in a prison is not just a moral problem, it is a financial one. Riots destroy property you have to repair. Escapes trigger investigations. Deaths in custody bring lawsuits, headlines, and government scrutiny. Every one of those events threatens the one thing your entire business depends on, which is the government's willingness to keep sending you people and keep paying you for them. So the very cost-cutting that makes you money in the short term is the same cost-cutting that can destroy the contract that makes you money at all. And there is a cost buried in that contract that almost no first-time owner sees coming, because it does not show up in the construction budget at all. Healthcare. When you take custody of a person, in most systems you also take on the legal responsibility for keeping them alive and well. You have to treat their illnesses, manage their chronic conditions, handle emergencies, and provide medical care whether or not it is convenient or cheap. And people in prison tend to be sicker than the general population to begin with. Worse, prison populations age. Longer sentences mean inmates who grow old behind your walls, and an elderly prisoner with heart disease or cancer can cost you many times what a young, healthy one does, all while still paying you only that same flat daily rate. So the very policies that keep your beds full for decades are the same ones that quietly load your business with some of its most expensive and least predictable costs. So now you understand the forces pulling against each other at the center of this business. On one side, the relentless drive to fill beds and cut costs, because that is where the profit lives. On the other side, the fragile need to keep the operation stable and clean enough that the government does not pull its people out, and the rising medical bills that grow heavier every year. Balance all of that perfectly and you have a money machine. Tilt too far toward profit and you get scandal. Tilt too far toward caution and you get losses. Almost nobody balances it forever, but we still have not reached the single most important number in the entire business. Remember, an empty bed is your enemy. So the most valuable thing you could possibly negotiate is not a higher daily rate. It is a guarantee. And this is the clause that turned this industry into something people argue about to this day. It is called an occupancy guarantee, sometimes a lockup quota. And what it does is simple and enormous. It says the government promises to keep your prison a certain percentage full, often 80, 90, sometimes 95%, and if they fail to send you enough prisoners to hit that number, they have to pay you anyway, as if the beds were full. Stop and think about what that clause does to your business. It takes your single greatest risk, the empty bed, and it hands it to the government. Suddenly you are not really being paid for occupancy at all. You are being paid for capacity. You get paid for the beds existing, whether or not there is anyone in them. Your revenue stops being a bet on crime and sentencing and becomes something close to a guaranteed subscription, signed by a government that cannot easily walk away. This is the holy grail of the private prison business. It is the difference between a risky operation and a nearly bulletproof one. And it is also exactly why so many people find this industry so troubling. Because think about what an occupancy guarantee quietly does to everyone's incentives. If the government has promised to keep your beds full or pay for them empty, then the government now has a financial reason to keep those beds full. Empty beds cost the taxpayer money for nothing. So the pressure is not to reduce the number of people in prison. The pressure is to maintain it. A contract that was supposed to save money on housing prisoners can quietly become a reason to keep prisons full, and that is the accusation that has followed this business for decades. There is an even deeper version of this problem, and it is the one that makes ethicists genuinely uncomfortable. In almost every other industry, a business succeeds when its customers do well and come back by choice. In this one, the thing that would be best for society, fewer people committing crimes, fewer people locked up, people leaving prison and never returning, is the exact thing that shrinks your revenue. A person who is rehabilitated and never comes back is, in the coldest financial terms, a lost customer. You would never say that out loud, but the structure of the business quietly rewards the opposite of what everyone claims to want, and that tension sits underneath every contract you sign. Whether or not you find that comfortable as an owner, it is the guarantee you would fight hardest for, because it transforms the entire risk profile of what you own. With a strong occupancy guarantee, your income becomes predictable enough that lenders will give you cheaper money, investors will pay more for your stock, and you can plan years ahead. Without it, you are exposed to something you cannot control at all, because here is the uncomfortable truth about the prison business that most owners discover too late. You do not control your own demand. Think about who actually fills your beds, not you. You do not arrest anyone. You do not sentence anyone. Your entire supply of customers is decided by forces completely outside your walls. By crime rates which rise and fall for reasons no business can predict, by police priorities, by prosecutors, by judges, by sentencing laws written in legislatures, by the politics of whoever happens to be in power. Every one of those can change, and when they change, the flow of people into your prison changes with them, and there is absolutely nothing you can do about it from inside your control room. This is the deep fragility hiding underneath the guaranteed income fantasy. For years, the trend can run in your favor. Tough on crime laws, longer sentences, more arrests, and your beds fill themselves. The money rolls in and it looks effortless, and you start to believe you have found a business that only goes one direction. And then the wind shifts. A new government decides that mass incarceration is too expensive, or too unjust, or both. Sentencing laws are softened. Nonviolent offenders are diverted to programs instead of cells. Whole categories of crime are reclassified, and slowly, then suddenly, the people stop arriving. And now you feel the full weight of everything we have talked about all at once. Your beds start to empty, but your debt does not shrink. Your buildings still need heating and guarding. Your medical bills for the inmates who remain do not fall. Your fixed costs sit there, immovable, while the per diem payments that were supposed to cover them dwindle. If you were lucky enough to have an occupancy guarantee, you survive, because the government keeps paying for the empty beds. If you were not, you are now running a vast, expensive facility that is half empty, hemorrhaging money on every silent, unoccupied cell. This is how prison companies that looked invincible for years suddenly find themselves closing facilities and watching their stock collapse. It has happened more than once. A company spends a decade as a market darling, expanding, borrowing, promising investors endless growth. Its entire story built on the idea that the flow of people would never slow, and then a single election, a single wave of reform, a single decision by a government to not renew a batch of contracts, and the same asset base that looked like a fortress becomes an anchor. The buildings that were supposed to be the safe part turn out to be the trap, because you cannot sell an empty prison to anyone except the one customer who just walked away. Some owners try to escape this trap with a clever piece of financial engineering. Instead of running prisons directly, they reorganize the whole company around the one thing that feels solid: the real estate, the buildings themselves. They turn the company into what is essentially a landlord, owning the facilities and leasing them out, and restructure it to enjoy the tax advantages that come with being treated as a real estate business rather than an operating one. On paper, it is elegant. You get to tell investors you are really just in the property business, collecting rent on hard assets. But it does not actually solve the core problem. A prison is not an office tower. There is only one kind of tenant on earth who wants to rent a building full of cells, and that tenant is the government. So no matter how you dress it up in the language of real estate, your fortune still rests entirely on the same fragile political promise it always did. And there is one more pressure closing in from a direction owners rarely price in at the start: reputation. This is not a business the public feels neutral about. Every death, every abuse scandal, every investigation is not just an operational problem. It is a moral one in the eyes of the world, and it travels. Banks have come under pressure to stop lending to the industry. Investment funds have been pushed to sell their shares. Governments have faced protests for signing the contracts at all. So even if the financial math works, you are operating a business where a chunk of society actively wants you not to exist, and that pressure can choke off your access to money and contracts no matter how well you run the place. So let us step back and put the whole machine together, because now the shape of it is clear. On paper, owning a prison looks like the safest business imaginable. Guaranteed customers, government money, demand that never disappears. But underneath that surface, it is one of the most exposed businesses you could possibly own. Enormous upfront debt that never flexes. Relentless staffing costs that punish every attempt to cut them. Medical bills that swell as your population ages. A revenue stream you do not control, decided by politics and law and public mood. And a product so morally charged that success itself can turn the world against you. The owners who win at this game are not the ones with the biggest buildings. They are the ones who understood from the very first day what they were actually buying. They were not buying concrete and steel. They were not even really buying beds. They were buying a promise from the government, written into a contract, that a certain number of human beings would keep flowing through their doors and that they would keep being paid for them. The entire fortune rises or falls on the strength and the length of that promise, not on the quality of the building, and that is the strange, uncomfortable core of this business, the thing that separates it from almost every other money machine. In a normal business, you succeed by serving your customers so well they choose to come back. In this one, your customers never chose to be there, and your real customer, the one who actually pays you, is a government whose long-term interest is supposedly to send you fewer people over time, not more. You are running a business whose ideal outcome for society is the slow disappearance of your own demand. So if you do decide to own a prison, understand what you are actually buying. You are not buying a building, You are not buying a guaranteed income. You are buying a contract with the state and a bet that the politics of punishment will keep running in your favor for longer than your debt takes to pay off. The walls will hold, the steel will last. The one thing you cannot build, cannot control, and cannot guarantee is the flow of people through the door. And in the business of locking people up, that flow is the only thing that was ever really worth anything. Everyone else sees a prison and thinks about the people locked inside it. The person who owns it thinks about something else entirely. Not the walls, not the cells, not even the inmates. They think about the contract on the desk, the promise behind it, and the quiet, unsettling question that hangs over the whole business. What happens to me on the day the world finally decides it wants fewer of these, not more?